Hi everyone, I am here. This is Elliot Jacobson, and I am live on an Ask Me Anything on this summer solstice day 2024. It is June 20th. So hi everyone. As usual, I need to do a mic check. So if somebody in chat could just say, hey, I could hear you, that would be fantastic. And that way I won't just be moving my mouth and saying nothing here. So yeah, it is quite a time to be alive, and this is an open invitation to anybody who happens to want to ask any question at all. You know, in Ask Me Anything, you usually think that you have an expert in one particular area and you only want to ask them about that thing. You know, I'm also have opinions about a lot of other things. I would say the only question I'm going to really dodge is anything political. I kind of just avoid that toxic environment as much as I can. But aside from asking me about the American presidential race or something else like that, go ahead and ask me anything. And thank you, Star Climber, for saying that I'm audible. So yeah, I just wanted to start here, as I often do, with saying a couple of the sort of what I've been putting up on YouTube lately, just so that in case you missed it, you can catch up to that. So let me see if I can't just go right to that right now, and then you can have an idea. So I put up this picture this morning on my Twitter account. So if you didn't see this one, I've been really trying to find better and better ways to express just how incredibly anomalous the global sea surface temperatures are. And you know, once you put a sort of a lot of data in there, you kind of can almost start thinking that, oh, well, it was just a little bit worse and a little bit worse, and you don't really see just how drastic the change has been. So what I decided to do was to just delete the years 2023 and 2024 from this graph altogether. So the blue lines are all of the data I have from 82 to 2022. And then on top of that, what I did is I layered just one more line, and I went through every day of the year and just picked out the maximum sea surface temperature for 2023 or 2024. And of course, we're just not even midway through 24 yet. And so I created one line that represents the maximums. And to me, this is just, a stunning graphic, because you just can't believe how much of a gap there is, how quickly these sea surface temperatures have left anything even vaguely sort of in the domain of what they've been in the past. So this one, you can just see that space, and we've been running multiple standard deviations above average for quite a while here. And then I put up one for the North Atlantic. Of course, the North Atlantic sort of was the first to make headlines, so rather than the global. And again, you can just see how far above any of the other sort of previously recorded temperatures it's been over the last since the start of 2023. I just look at this; it's just stunning to think that this is, this is where we've been. So. One more thing to show you, just in case you haven't seen this, I want to show you this little video I did where I graphed the monthly global surface temperatures, and I'm not 100% sure that the audio is going to come through on this, but what I did here was it was my first Excel animation that I ever created, where one after another I plotted the monthly global surface temperatures, the average for an entire month. And you can see down at the bottom is the span of years. So these dots here are from 1940 to 41, all the months that are average. And then what I did was a quadratic trend line. And a lot of people have this issue with not understanding the difference between accelerating and exponential. So essentially what we have is linear, that's a line. Then we have quadratic. And so that's like an x squared term, right? If you remember from your high school algebra. X squared, that's also so that is a quadratic trend line. And from there, if we think about what acceleration is quadratic. So when we see a pattern where the best fit is a quadratic, then we're talking about acceleration. Now, exponential is something entirely different, and it's one of my pet peeves is how people misuse the word exponential. I'm glad to go into that rant sometime if somebody asks me to do it, but I'm not going to. Let me just say there is a huge difference between x squared and 2 to the x. 2 to the x is exponential x squared, right? Even if you plug in, for example, 10, right? 10 squared is 100, 2 to the 10th is over 1,000. So the rate of change between exponential and quadratic is so enormous. So what this graphic does, though, is it demonstrates to you that we do, in fact, have a quadratic accelerating trend going on right now with global temperatures. And you can see that develop over time. Just this quadratic fit gets better and better, and more monthly temperatures are put into the data. So, somebody said, hey, there seems to be a correlation between average temperature and tequila consumption. Well, that's certainly the case for our friend Sam. So I watched this quadratic here. To me, this is the most amazing thing. And this is just like anybody tells you that there's some sort of constant decadal rate of change of the global surface temperature. You're not paying attention to just like how obvious it is that we have accelerating temperature. So here we go. All right. Hope you enjoyed that. So let's go back to just me here. All right, let's see what kind of questions I have and who's here. Hi, Reeves, Cat, or Opals. You are somebody I've been in touch with. Let's see. Igor Value EV or Value EV. When we have a drop in the sea surface temperature like the one this year, where does all the energy go? Deeper into the ocean or up in the atmosphere? So we haven't actually had a drop in the sea surface temperature. But yeah, so the ocean has a tremendous capacity to store heat, right? Essentially, all water will continue to absorb heat up until the time it boils. That's the only time when, water ceases to be able to get hotter, is when it goes through a phase transition. So yeah, we actually, because of changes in wind direction, for example, currents are blown from west to east or east to west, and that can drive surface waters down, or drive water that's hotter in one part of the planet to another part of the planet. We also have currents that will take water on the surface and send it down deep, or take water that's low down and bring it back to the surface. So essentially, there is so much water on this planet right now where you can sort of hide away heat. And so these sorts of anomalies, these periodic oscillations, and there are more of them than just ENSO, right? There are Pacific decadal oscillation. There's all of these things. I'm not that familiar with where they all are and what they all are, but I know there's one in the Indian Ocean. There's one in the Atlantic now. There's actually something called the Atlantic Nino, or Nino, that's come into play right now. These are all changes in ocean temperature that are due to these sort of long-term periodic oscillations. Some of that has to do with wind and currents and upwelling and a number of other factors. So at any rate, I'm not sure I really answered that question. All right, Derek says, is a bit of orange powder over ancient Stonehenge a bad way to get publicity for action on governments on climate? I applaud those guys, especially since it was cornstarch. I mean, what people don't realize is, like, it was just orange cornstarch, right? It wasn't like spray paint. They actually knew that they didn't want to deface Stonehenge, which I applaud them for, and they did want to get recognition. That has been put into the media with all sorts of opinions, what a horrible thing to do to destroy this ruin. Look, I really applaud the young people who are doing these sort of on the edge, the most drastic actions they can think of to bring attention, whether it's disrupting a sporting event, or throwing, paint on a politician, or a bank, or, disrupting a fossil fuel executive during a speech, or painting a jet, or Stonehenge, all of these things. The one that I don't like, and I hope they won't ever really do it, is to deface a piece of art in a way that it cannot recover. So we don't want to do lasting damage to anything artistic, and that would certainly be my one call. I don't actually think that it's getting that much of the right sort of attention in terms of actually making change happen. It is certainly tells you how desperate this group of people feels, and how knowledgeable they are, how educated they are about what's coming. And you get that sense of desperation. And, there are a lot of people trying to sort of say how desperate things are. And Roger Hallam, for example, with his Revolution, is one of those that I would put on there, or Rupert Reed. And, there are people out there saying we have to take these incredibly strong actions. Even the Antonio Guterres of the UN, I mean, he's saying these same things. So the fact is, people are saying these things while temperatures keep rising, and, CO2 emissions hit a new all-time high. And so, yeah, I support them. I absolutely support those kids. All right, Jane. Hi, Jane. Elliot, can you speak to the idea raised by Dan in conversation with Michael Mann about the decadal look back? And what's your opinion on whether that's still helpful, or if we're possibly accelerating? Well, let me just show you. I'm going to have to actually bring this up on my own website. So hang on for just a second, but I think that that's an excellent question. I really think that what came down on Dan's show with Michael Mann is a very, very unfortunate turn of events. And let me just tell you why. Actually, let me do this first, and then I'll tell you more thoughts about that. Hang on for just a second. I have to track down this one post. So here it is. This is what I want to do. I'm going to go back to my... all right. So let me tell you what I did here. What I did was I plotted decadal temperature changes. All right. So essentially what I did is, if you look at January 1st, 1950, and January 1st, 1960, and you took the difference between those two temperatures, that would be a point on this graph. Then January 2nd, 1950 to January 2nd, 1960. January 3rd to January 3rd, and so on all the way up until whenever I finish, January 1st or 2014 to January 1st of 2024, right? And so each one of the points on this graph represents a gap of 10 years. And then what I did is I said, what is the best linear fit to that, right? And this is the line I got. And that line tells you how much the atmosphere is warmed over the last decade, right? It is smoothing out all of these day-to-day things, and it's saying, look, if you really could zoom in on that, you would see, for example, from 1950 to 1960, we barely had any decadal warming at all. But by the time you got to the let's just say by the time, let's see if you can see my thing here. By the time we got to the 1980s, we were already at a 1/10 of a degree per decade. And by the time we got to the early 2000s, we were at 0.2 per decade. And if you take that all the way to the present moment and you figure out what that point is, that is 0.3 C per decade, right? And so this graphic is part of an article I wrote. Let me just show you where that is. That's on my website. I hope you'll read it. How Hot is Hell? I mean Earth, where I'm trying to settle the debate about exactly what the current rate of warming is. And so when you look at the decadal timeline, then it is clear that the current rate at which the climate is warming, I mean, this is based on data, not models. This is based on data from 1950. The current rate of warming is 0.30 degrees. It just happens to be almost exactly 0.30 degrees per decade. And if you forecast that forward, what you find is that the average rate of increase per year in decadal warming is 0.005 C, which means that in 2025, the decadal rate will be 0.305, and then in 2026 it'll be 0.31, and 2027 will be 0.315. So every year we are gaining 0.005 C of increase in decadal warming. All right, that is what this graph shows. That is accelerated warming. All right, in a nutshell, period, accelerated warming. I'm not looking at models, I'm looking at hard data. Right? This is the data. There is no doubt about accelerated warming. Anybody who denies it is just not looking at the data. You can look at your models and say there's not accelerated data, but if you look at the data, it is accelerating. And so if you actually use my model, this model that I'm showing to you, what we do is we get a current global surface temperature, well, for 2023 of 1.38, for 2024 of 1.41, of 2025 for 1.44. Now, of course, 2024 is going to be warmer than 0.41. But what I'm talking, 1.41. But what I'm talking about is the long-term, sort of when someone says, where are we now in the long term, right? So this model predicts breaking 1.5 in 2027 or 2028. And breaking 2.0 in the, I believe it's in the, early 2040s, but I'd have to double check on that. So yeah, that's sort of my opinion about accelerated warming. Hopefully that helps you with that question. All right. Mamadou, I can't say your name. It is stunning to see the MAX 2023-2024 merged. I completely and totally agree with you. It is stunning to see these two merged. All right, let's see. Spice asks, can our lack of a blue ocean event be attributed to a slowdown in the AMOC? In addition, what effect does a change in ocean arteries have on Antarctica? So the blue ocean event, by the way, if you were to read my blog, I had an over-under of 2043 for a blue ocean event. Everybody who sort of looked at the data from 2012, I mean, there is this incredibly fast dip going on in the Arctic sea ice. And you were right to think that we were going to have a blue ocean event in the next 3 to 5 years. It just looked obvious if you just looked at the trend line from about 5 years worth of data. And then it stopped, right? And I can't remember, I've read multiple reasons why, conjectures. I mean, on a decadal time span, we're still losing enough ice so that mid 2030s to sometime in the 2040s seems like a shoo-in. But there are these feedbacks. The one that I know about that's most notable is, well, there are two. The first one is that open ocean actually creates fog, a lot of fog in the Arctic, and fog has very high reflectivity, albedo. So it's not like the open ocean is just randomly absorbing more sunlight and getting hotter as a result, right? If open ocean creates fog, then what's the difference? Fog and ice are very close. And the other is we're actually getting from what I understand, more snow, more sort of re-brightening of the ice happening that tends to reflect more so that it doesn't melt as fast. So, I'm not sure. I think I've read some other feedbacks. As far as the slowdown in the AMOC, so the slowdown in the AMOC is greatly overhyped right now. Yes, there are early signs of a slowdown, but you could trace those early signs back, I think, gosh, I forget what the latest date is, to the 1930s. They've actually sort of seen a trend in the slowdown going on for 80 years or 90 years already. It may be accelerating, and you could actually look at some of the sea surface temperature plots versus models for AMOC collapse and see, especially around Greenland, the blue spots where it's really, really cold water is exactly sort of corresponds to a phase transition in the AMOC. And, the predictions are sometime this century that we will have a collapse. And that collapse will not be like what's that movie, The Day After Tomorrow, where one day it works and the next day it collapses. This is a very slow process. And yes, as that process slows down, it is going to get a lot colder. And that is certainly going to stop any decline in Arctic sea ice when that collapse finally transitions in full. But for now, I would still expect, we're still getting record temperatures in Europe. We're still getting record high temperatures in Scandinavia, which is one of the hot spots on the planet. Until we see those areas really going through drastic cool downs, we're not going to get the signal that this thing is happening right now. And until we see that drastic cool down, there's going to be no lack of no increase of ice in the Arctic. Okay, let's see. Video sound is drowning you out. All right, thank you for that. Whoa, turn the music off. Whoa, sorry everybody. Sorry. Can you hear me now, or is that music still playing? I hope it's playing. Okay, so I kind of screwed that up. I'm just now getting to the part of the chat where everybody is complaining about how loud the music was. All right. Oh man, that is pretty brutal. I'm sorry, guys. I really am. All right, Akron, start writing me stuff again, all right? I will be very careful about replaying any other videos that have sound. I did not do that quite right, I can see. So you can turn on your ears again, all right, everybody? Yeah, so the Blue Ocean event is overrated. Yeah, it is. Let's see. I don't see. Only solution is massive scale back of industrial civilization. So that's still, so thank you, Richard, for that comment that the only solution is massive scale back of industrial civilization. That is certainly what, for example, the degrowth movement, especially in Europe, would advocate. So the idea there is that all sort of super polluting first world nations should scale way back on their lifestyles, their wealth, their riches. They should share some of that with the global south and try and improve the standard of living there while taking the hit in the north, try and stabilize at current emissions and gradually bring things down. So that's the only movement I actually know that has any sort of widespread dialogue, the degrowth people, as far as, let's just stop civilization. Nobody is seriously talking about that. And when you say it's the only solution, I mean, the definition of a solution is it sort of has to be a feasible thing to put into place. And it's really clear that there's going to be no movement towards just sort of, stopping civilization. And, if I had godlike powers to save the planet, the first thing I would do would be to ban all travel by cars except for emergency travel. So, you would have to do your best to shop walking to and from, do your errands walking, biking, whatever. I would ban all travel of any type that's not necessary travel. So, going to visit your relatives for a holiday is not necessary travel. I would certainly put a ban on for example, any aircraft that aren't, serving a purpose to supply food or something else necessary. I mean, you can really strip down civilization pretty far if you have the power to do it. So yeah, any rate, I do agree with you in principle, Richard, but that's a big ain't gonna happen. Dan Roth asks, what are some of the symptoms and time frames of AMOC collapse? Again, that's a question that's really timely. There have been some great videos on that recently, and Stefan, what's his name, Romsdorf, has put out a video on that. So, my understanding from what I've seen is that this is on a decadal scale, and it is something that even once it gets triggered in a large way, will take decades to really come into force. I think civilization is going to collapse well ahead of the AMOC. Right? I just don't think the two are one is going to force the other at this point. It's sort of like sea level rise. Sea level rise is an inevitability. We're looking at 3 feet plus of sea level rise by the end of this century. But I don't think sea level rise is going to be the cause of collapse of global industrial civilization. I just think it's going to be part of what eventually happens to whatever remains. So, AMOC collapse will be the same. So let me just answer the question. So, Elliot, what do you think is going to lead to the collapse of global industrial civilization? Because that seems like a question that I should be able to answer. So collapse is going to happen primarily because infrastructure gets destroyed faster than it is capable of being replaced. And along with that, we will have due to crazy weather conditions, we're going to have some food shortages happening in larger regions of the world. But the infrastructure problem is really huge, and we're already seeing this where cities are getting wiped out by fires or roads by floods or coastal. If we look at what happens along the coast and just try and imagine when we can no longer onboard or offboard imports and exports, that is part of the trauma that's going to start happening to our infrastructure in the short term. And then, we just have all these weather events, heat waves and floods and fires and these other things also disrupting infrastructure and our ability to conduct our lives on a day-to-day basis. So, collapse is going to happen in the near term simply because we are outgrowing our capacity to repair. I'm sorry. The problems with our infrastructure are escalating faster than our ability to repair them. And, that'll come to a head, I don't know, in the next 10 to 20 years, in my opinion, easily before 2050. So it will not be a sudden thing. It'll be regional and spread out. So when will we have the first doomer politician? Why don't you run, Jason? I'll vote for you. All right, let's see. What else do we have? The Devil's Therapist, mourning as in MOURNING. Let's see. I have been to therapists before in my life. I had an interesting experience with a sort of a Freudian psychotherapist. When my parents died in the early 2000s, I went to one of these people who doesn't say anything, and you sit on a couch and just sort of say whatever you want for 3 days a week. And somewhere in the middle of it, I started to grow suspicious that my psychotherapist was using my case for some other purpose, and I tracked her down and realized she was getting her PhD from a university and needed a special case, for a case study for her thesis, and I figured out I was her case study, and I confronted her with that, and ended up just sort of leaving the therapy, and probably totally screwed up her PhD as a result. So that was, therapy can be interesting. Let's see. Reese wrote, Zeke listed 6 papers that have low sulfur impact. So look, the question of sulfur, what is the impact of the new shipping fuel regulations, is a question that I think will be answered accurately in the near term. I understand that people like Zeke Housefather and Michael Mann and a few other climate scientists sort of discount the impact of this, whereas Hansen and Leon Simons and others, sort of give a very convincing argument that this impact is 10x what people like Housefather think it is. And, I tend towards there's more to shipping fuels than Housefather and Mann want to say, but I am not willing to go all in on it, even though the evidence is fairly strong. So I am really awaiting sort of more information on that one, and hopefully we'll get that. What I think is not fair is to just discount the possibility wholesale. And recently, if you've been paying attention to the media, there have been a couple more articles on shipping fuels that have come out that really have attributed the recent rise directly to shipping fuels. This has been in the mass media. I don't know the papers they're referring to. I'm going to sort of stay neutral, but leaning more towards Hansen in this one. So let's see. So if you ask for why is Hansen different, so the point of the difference between the two, it all comes down to what's called the equilibrium climate sensitivity. And the issue is if you double the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, take it from 280 to 560, and then let the planet completely stabilize, let the system stabilize, assume there's no feedback that's going to sort of take you to a Venus type situation, just sort of double the CO2 in the atmosphere from pre-industrial times. What will the equilibrium temperature of the planet be at the end of sort of when it settles down? And Mann and sort of a long history of climate scientists have put that in a relatively low range of roughly 3C, in that range, 2.5, 3.5. And there are a bunch of papers that put the equilibrium climate sensitivity in that range. And what Hansen showed using paleoclimate data was that it is in fact much more likely to be closer to 5C. I think he did 4.8C, and then he had an error bar around that. Now, if you have that high of a sensitivity to CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, then the conclusion is that if you look at our current CO2, that we must have already warmed a lot more than we think we've warmed. All right. Well, if we've already warmed a lot more, then why aren't we experiencing that warming? Well, the only answer to that has to be the impact of aerosols, right? So apparently, if we already have warmed a lot, but we're not really that warm, then there has to be a forcing in the other direction, and that forcing is sulfate aerosols. And so there is this sort of balance between the two. And if you assume a smaller ECS, then you'll have a smaller forcing from aerosols. And so the extent to which the argument is about shipping fuels, it really is an argument about what the equilibrium climate sensitivity is. All right, that's the key number. And, that is still open to debate. You see new papers come out all the time about that. And really, if you want to know, every time a new paper comes out, it tends to agree on the low side, right? And not on the high side with Hansen. On the other hand, there were these climate models that sort of made the ECS, out to be much larger, that were just sort of wholesale discounted in the last run. And so these so-called hot models, if you just say, well, those don't make sense, and you discount them, then yeah, everything else is going to look smaller. So once you throw those back in, you tend to move more towards Hansen's side. So I think it's a really good question, and hopefully that explains it. So let's see. So Going South says we should have been, let's see, did I just miss that? I have to, sometimes I scroll in the incorrect way through the chat, and then I skip a bunch of stuff. So Going South says that the 2012, the projection should have been in terms of volume and not just September sea ice minimums. Volume is really important because ultimately volume is going to be the final trigger. So we can have extent of, very thin ice. But if you have low volume, then what that means is sooner or later, you're going to have a year where the conditions are just right, where that ice is just going to melt, right? So keeping track of volume sort of gives us a good sense of when we might have a tipping point. And I incorporated sea ice volume into my own prediction of 2043. So I agree with you on that. All right. How concerned am I with the Thwaites Glacier and its melting impacts on Greenland? It's every time you turn around, you hear another horror story about it. The latest one is sort of the warm water encroachment up for a couple of kilometers now underneath it. I'm just sort of waiting for that to happen. So we'll see. Do I think it's strange it's snowing in the Northern Rockies and Cascades at the moment? I was in the Rockies in June back in 1982. I took a camper van through the Rockies, and it was mid-June, and it got down to 9 degrees, and it was snowing. So it is certainly the case that they can have crazy weather there in June. I mean, snowing in June in the Rockies is just not a very abnormal thing. I mean, the joke goes, right, if for people who live, I have some friends who live in Cody, Wyoming, right? And this joke. The joke is, how many seasons do you have? They have 2 seasons. The seasons are winter and July the 4th. So, I don't look at that as strange. And I mean, another thing is that one of the things to look for as far as the impacts of climate change are these Rossby waves, right? These really strong stationary fronts that happen, so that you get heat in one place and that heat persists, right? It just stays there. It doesn't move away. We're losing sort of this dynamic impact of the atmosphere. So whenever you have, a trough come up from the tropics, right, you have the other end of that, which is cold air coming down from the north. And so if you just sort of have this wavy pattern around the planet, then, you look at that hot spot right now, the east coast of the US, you can kind of expect this time of year for there to be still some lingering sort of trough behavior like that. And that's other part is exactly where they're getting these cold temperatures and this snow right now. So let's see, what is my opinion of AI doomerism? AI is going to become a strong player in our lives, stronger and stronger. I mean, I'm tempted to use it all the time, and I have used it. I've used it to help me compose limericks, climate limericks. I've helped used it to help me compose thank you letters, and I used it just yesterday to sort of give me a couple paragraphs about a certain thing in gambling that I was writing about. So it is becoming sort of a day-to-day, daily use thing, right? And the thing about AI, and not just AI, but electric vehicles along with them and crypto along with them, is we're putting incredible strain on our electric grid. Just as the time we're trying to do this transition using all of this electricity we're generating with renewables to go off fossil fuels. So yeah, it's like great. AI is this sort of power hungry technology, but I don't know whether AI will gain enough power one day where you ask it the question, AI, what is the single action you would take to save the planet right now? And the answer from the AI is human extinction, and poof, it gains self realization and takes on that behavior in order to save the planet. So I think that's the kind of thing people are concerned about, whether AI has the power to actually implement the solution that it knows is the right solution for the planet. Going south says Norwegian coast could be 20 to 30 C colder in the winter. Yeah, exactly. So during the AMOC, if you actually look at where these cold temperatures are predicted, it's sort of the east and the west and the northwest coasts of Europe that get the brunt of it, especially into the Norway and other parts around there. All right. So Martin asks, so what about this? We replace all existing fossil fuels with renewables. Then to increase CO2 sequestration, we send all of our livestock to degraded land. So that falls under the category of ain't going to happen. We are not going to replace all of our existing fossil fuels with renewable. Let me just tell you one reason we're not going to do that. Because if we did that, we would have the death of 4 billion people in a year. So the most important product we get from fossil fuels is not gasoline or diesel or shipping fuel. The most important product we get are fertilizers. And these fertilizers are used in mass for global, farming. And simply, we could not be producing crops anymore on a lot of the land that we've been using for crops without these fertilizers. We've degraded this land to such a degree. If you actually look at how many humans the planet could support without fossil fuel assistance, and with these fertilizers, it's about half. So I think when you say that as a solution, what you're really saying is we have to reduce the population of the planet by at least 50% as well. So if that's part of your solution, you want to rethink it. I don't disagree entirely that that will be the future. Now, one of the big articles in the news today was this latest story about the fact that total emissions for last year sort of were just figured out, and they are actually set a record, right, with a record greenhouse gas emissions in 2024. And when you break that down by country, some countries in Europe and the US and other places are actually showing a decline as fossil fuels are replaced by electric vehicles and coal is replaced by alternative energy sources. But they pointed to India, with 1.4, 1.5 billion people, it's using 8% more fossil fuels, right? Creating 8% more emissions. So, we want to say, well, it's all India's fault, but no, it isn't all India's fault, because what we do is the first world exports its emissions. We buy products that are manufactured in China and India and in other high polluting countries. And that's where the manufacturing happens on this planet, because the labor is cheap and they don't care about the environment. And so we're able to say, aha, look at this refrigerator I bought, or look at this computer I bought that has these metals in it, right? Or whatever it is that we're using in a first world country, and we can say, yeah, but it's all eco-friendly. But no, it isn't, because the emissions that has associated with it in its creation of that thing that we bought or we used, are exported. So we can only look at global emissions, right? We can only look at global emissions. We can't look at the emissions for a country. We live on, as Friedman said, the world is flat now. There is no place where, what happens in that place is happening in isolation, right? All economies are depending on other economies in this huge network of trade that goes on. So yeah, our emissions are exported, so CO2 is continuing to increase, even though electric and renewables are hitting all-time high in certain countries. So again, this is just an example of Javon's paradox. Javon's paradox, which is essentially, as you improve efficiency, so in this case efficiency in generation of electricity, as you improve industrial efficiency, you don't actually lower the demand for something else, right? You just find ways of using that new efficiency to grow. And that's exactly what's happening with AI and electric vehicles and crypto, among many other things. All right, let me see. Mexico City loses 40% of their water to leaks. Mexico City is talking about going on day zero, right? They're headed towards day zero. I keep hearing rumors about this, but Mexico has had one of the monsters of all heat waves this last few months, and yeah, it could be that Mexico City hits day zero. So that's something to certainly pay attention to. Thank you for all these great questions, by the way. I really appreciate it. I know I've gotten some things wrong. I hope you will forgive me for getting things wrong. I'm just going purely on memory. Usually when I speak in public, I try and keep the thing that I speak to a relatively small sort of framework where I can study it in advance to remind myself of all these things, because there's just too much to sort of know and remember. And someone like Michael Mann, for example, who is so prototypically academic in that he is very deep in one area and sort of refuses to talk about what's outside of that silo. So, he is so invested in climate change, not understanding this larger sort of systems framework where, we have all of these planetary boundaries, and fossil fuel emissions leading to climate change is just one of them, right? Nitrogen, water availability, fresh water, right? And I don't know, I'm not remembering them right now. And that's what I mean by boning up before you talk about something. But if you just ask yourself sort of these questions and you try and have a larger grasp of all the issues, the kind of things you have to keep in your mind all at once really grow. I do my best, so apologize in advance for getting a few things wrong, as I know I've done. Let me see what I have here from about. All right. Dan Roth asked, do you think local public gardens would make a hungry mob scenario better or worse? So, there's been whenever you sort of talk to people about the fact that you need, the planet needs nitrogen fertilizers, they'll say, oh, but you can have little local public gardens, there could be gardens on rooftops and so on. I mean, it's not feasible, the amount of land a human needs to feed themselves, right, without fertilizers, a couple acres, right, to actually grow enough. And so when you have, 8 million or 10 million people in the greater LA area, we don't have 20 million acres of land to grow the crops without fertilizers for these 10 million people, right? So it's just, the scales don't equal out at all. So yeah, when there are food riots, right? When we actually the infrastructure breaks down to the point that we cannot make food deliveries, and you see this happening occasionally. It happened in the UK a couple years back, for example. When you stop being able to make food deliveries, yeah, people are hungry. They will, wherever there is food, they will get that food. And we saw this in the early days of the pandemic in 2020, right? When we really thought, that the world was getting shut down, right? And there were so many things sort of were purchased in panic, like immediately. Do you remember how hard it was to get toilet paper in March of 2020? I ended up ordering a case, 80 rolls, from a restaurant supply company online, because that's the only place I could find it, right? It was crazy. I'm not a restaurant, and the 80 rolls lasted a while, but that's what's going to happen. We will have panic buying or looting, and certainly if there's anything available publicly. And people say, well, I know how to hunt, right? I know how to hunt, and so I'll just hunt my own food. Well, that's nice until you realize that right now, humans plus cows, cattle and other domesticated creatures that we eat, account for, tell me if I'm wrong, I think it's over 90%. It might be 93% of the total mammalian biomass on the planet. So, what are you going to eat that you hunt, right? If all these humans are hungry, we will eat every rabbit and every bear and every giraffe and everything else we can eat in a matter of weeks to months, and leave the planet desolate of life. So, there is no solution here when this comes to pass. So Richard says Hanson's 2009 book, Storm of Our Grandchildren, must read. I have a lot of must reads. Let me just show you some of my must reads here. This is a must read. Bright Green Lies, must read. Must read. Get this book, all right? Bright Green Lies. Not an advertisement. I'm not getting money for this, all right? I'm just telling you this. This one right here, The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells. Must read, all right? Must read. You got to read this book. And as much as he denies it, this is a book that is telling us the truth about what's happening as the planet heats up. Jeff Goodell has told me that this is a call to action. It might be a call to action, but if there's no action, then what he's saying, right? So there are some books that I really, really like. I have a bunch of others. Let me just show you one other one that I really personally like, and that's this one, Homo Ecophagus. And this is unfortunately, it's kind of too expensive book. But what this book is about is it gives you sort of a textbook as if you were in college. It has this sort of tiny writing with pictures in it like that really gives you the details of different systems and how they're being impacted as collapse continues on its way. So let's see what else we have. Better late than never, Evening Doomers. All right, goodbye, Ian. Ian is great. That's Collapse Aphorisms. Please follow Collapse Aphorisms on Twitter if you don't already. Jeanette asks, given the course that we're on, do you have any advice for someone in their early 20s? I would say that choose your battles wisely. There are some battles that are worth having, and there are some that aren't. And right now, if you're in your early 20s, you are surrounded with fights, with causes, with battles you could have. And you can feel overwhelmed by all the outrage you have about how many things are wrong right now. And so what I would say, more than anything, to sort of be able to cope with collapse, well, two things. One is try and find a community that's collapse aware so that you can at least have these conversations in an open way, with people who know, right? Not with people who are trying to say, oh, if we only all became vegans or we all bought EVs and solar. And with people who know that we're heading towards collapse. Find that community. That's one thing you want to do. And the other thing is find anything that you can do, right, for the planet. And when I say something for the planet, you know, I personally volunteer. My main volunteer work is with Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is an organization that provides health services to women primarily, but it also, you know, gives help to anybody who is dealing with gender issues of any sort. Doesn't matter what gender. So, you know, I just sort of feel like they've had their troubles or ups and downs in the past, but they are on the right side of everything, I personally believe. So I do a lot of work for them. I've also worked for the Wildlife Care Network, or volunteered for the Wildlife Care Network, you know, directly feeding sort of pelicans that were starving. So just find something, find a way to volunteer. I think service volunteerism is a path, you know, with your whatever extra time you have, that will give you some sense of being grounded in all of this noise. And the only things I would advise against, I would definitely advise against anything political. Do not get involved with a political campaign, because honestly right now politics don't matter, and they will try and make you think that Biden has to get elected, you have to stop Trump. And you know, I think Trump is one of the most god-awful individuals on the planet. But you know, what has Biden done? Well, has he in fact made good progress? Well, what he has done is he's you know, stopped a pipeline, and he has signed the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a giveaway of billions of dollars to electric, you know, wind and solar, among other things. And I'm not a fan of wind and solar. So to me, you know, the leader who would actually make a difference would be someone more like Roger Hallam, who is talking about revolution at a societal level. And until we have that candidate in the White House, and that isn't going to happen until we have that candidate who understands that we're in collapse, and that you know, essentially the only path forward is collapse. Until we have that candidate in the White House, the rest is disaggravation. So that would be my only caution to you. I hope that helps. That's a very, very hard question. Let me see. Elliot, do you think man-made aerosols are minimal compared to natural aerosols? So aerosols have a lot of different, there are lots of different aerosols. There are sea salt aerosols, for example. There's dust aerosols that blow off the Sahara. There are aerosols from volcanism. You know, there's just other aerosols just by evaporation off the ocean. You know, I mean, aerosols there's a whole huge chemistry of aerosols, right? There are aerosols that destroy the ozone layer. So, you know, when you say, do you think man-made aerosols are minimal compared to natural? Well, which aerosol? And what is the impact of that particular aerosol? I don't think man-made sea salt aerosols are very significant, but I think man-made, chlorofluorocarbons are a big problem, and that's an aerosol. So, you know, destroying the ozone layer in the 1980s and 90s was a huge issue, and one we fortunately took strong action against with the Montreal Protocol. So if you're talking in particular about sulfate aerosols, I do think that the human-generated sulfate aerosols, unless we have strong volcanism in a particular year, dominate all sulfate aerosol impacts by far, right? So, you know, this was recently, there was some research about the aerosols that were released from, about Chinese aerosols. And what happened is that as China cleaned up their air, and you know, they had this huge problem with sulfate aerosols that they were killing, you know, millions of people a year with their air pollution as they cleaned up their sulfur fuels. That actually created this thing called the blob, which was this big area of hot ocean over the northeast, well, around Alaska, Washington State, and that area off into the Pacific. So you could just see this. They called it the blob, and it was there for years and years, and it totally dominated our weather, right? So it pretty much blocked storms coming down from into my part of the country here, to the extent that we had a massive drought situation that lasted years and years and years. Our local reservoir got down to 7%. We had wildfires year after year after year. 2009 and 10 nearly burned down my house in back-to-back years. The Thomas Fire came in when was the Thomas Fire? In 2017, nearly burned down. It came about a mile from here, nearly burned down our zoo. So yeah, I don't, the fact that reducing aerosols can have this sort of global impact is definitely a thing, right? It's definitely a thing. And what happened with the reduction in Chinese aerosols being linked to the blob, which had this huge weather impact on the west coast of the United States, should be like the top of the radar of anybody who wants to consider whether shipping aerosols could actually have an impact or not. Great question. Boy, I'm way behind. I hope this is going okay for you guys, that I'm asking your questions now almost a half an hour behind. So let me see, I'm at 105. What are the most recent questions here? You guys are great. Thank you so much. I'm gonna go backwards a little bit. Martin Wormuth says, Roger Hallam is hosting an online conference this weekend for collapse-aware people. Yes, he is. And, great. Great. I'm glad he's doing it. And if you haven't ever heard Roger Hallam sort of speak, he is one of the most passionate people you will ever hear speak. A few months back, Hannah Ritchie was interviewed by Rachel Donald for, I forget exactly. You could find that on YouTube if you look for it. Hannah Ritchie had written a book where she kind of bashed doomers, and she was sort of, again, pro, reduce fossil fuels, increase renewables, kind of the thing. And so as she was bashing doomers, Rachel Donald said, hey, could you name a doomer? And she thought for a second, and there's so many famous doomers out there, right? That are genuine doomers you could pick from. I would, if I were to pick a doomer at random, Michael Dowd would be the first one. Oh, Michael Dowd's a doomer, right? Well, she picked Roger Hallam, and Roger is anything but a doomer, right? He is sort of an old world, just revolution guy. We need revolution. And I mean, he's right. We need revolution, but he's also wrong, because we'll never have revolution. Not the global type of revolution where there's suddenly a global government where all first world countries are sort of now in this new epiphany of what needs to be done. So I honor him, but I'm also sort of sorry that he's spending all the effort on that paradigm, which is a big ain't gonna happen. So that was interesting. Let's see. So there was a report recently from biologists. This is the Devil's Therapist. There was a report recently from biologists that visited a park in North Korea. They basically saw no living thing like bugs, birds, worms, or anything else. I don't know that particular report. Last year, I had a real problem here with bees. There were no bees, and I was seeing dead squirrels in the street. So, things happen, and probably there's some poison there. It's killing everything. It's more likely than nuclear radiation killing everything. I don't know. All right, let's see. I am looking for what else to show you here. Let me just talk a moment. This might entertain you about being on CNN. So this was my third time on CNN. I was just on CNN on the 17th of June. And let me just tell you how that works, because it's pretty weird, right? So you get an email in the morning, 8 a.m. Hey, are you interested in being on CNN today with so and so? In this case, it was Anna Karen on CNN International. We have a spot for you at 8 p.m. tonight. And what am I going to say? I'm going to say, yeah, I want to be on CNN. So you write back, right? And then a little while later, you get an email. I got an email that said, could you sort of give us some bullet points? And they gave me 4 questions. And so they were difficult questions like, what do you think is going to happen to global temperatures during the transition from El Nino to La Nina? So, you sort of write down the things that you've heard 100 other people say, because of, what, I mean, I'm not going to contradict kind of the status quo on questions like that, but, the question I really want to answer is, what do you think about the future of global industrial civilization? But, those aren't the questions that they put there. So I answer all these questions, and then I say, okay, that's what they're going to ask me about. So I study and study and study, and I try and put all this information into my head for 4 or 6 hours, and then it's around 7 o'clock, and I'm looking at all my notes, and I say, and what I did is I took those questions, and I said, well, pretend I hadn't done any of this work, and I was just answering these off the top of my head. What would I really want to say? What do you think the difference in the climate's going to be as we go from El Nino to La Nina? And I'm thinking, well, the planet is fucking hot right now. And we'll be lucky if we get to 1.4 with La Nina, and then the average will be 1.5, right? Because that's kind of, that's the buzz right now. Like, we're breaking 1.5. And so what I really want to talk about is 1.5, not La Nina. And so I sort of answer these questions to myself off the top of my head, and then I just took all of my notes and I put them in the shredder, right? So the time comes, and the weird thing is that they give you this sort of link. They email you a link and say, click on this. And when you click on it, it says, call the control room. And so, you call the control room, and they say, oh, you look fine. We've tested your camera and mic. You look fine, but you can't see anything. They can see you. You can't say anything. And fine, the time comes for the interview, and Anna Karen comes on, and she's just the nicest woman. She just wants to have a 5-minute get to know you talk before I go on, because this is taped, it's not live. So just to sort of break the ice. And so we have this nice conversation. But the thing that you don't know, that you would never guess, is as I'm talking to her, I'm looking straight into the camera, but what I'm seeing is just a blank, empty screen. It's not like Zoom, it's not like Google Meet or anything else. It's just the CNN logo on a screen with me talking and them saying that they can see me and hear me just fine. So you have to sort of pretend to be able to see the things that they're showing you, right? You have to sort of pretend that you know what's going on in the interview. So at any rate, I was so grateful to have that interview, and then I managed to track down the transcript. So if you haven't read the full transcript, let me encourage you to do that. The full transcript, so this was broadcast live internationally, and essentially this is their 1-hour loop that plays for like 6 hours or 8 hours at all the airports, internationally for a period of time. And so I managed to put that loop, or I put the video up onto my website. Again, that's climatecasino.net. And then I managed to find the actual transcript of that, because when they did the video version that I grabbed off the internet, they only gave 3 minutes, and they left out the best part. And so apparently this did go live globally. This went live globally. And let me just read this to you. It was amazing to me this went live globally. Karen said to me, and this was so beautiful of her to say this, is it too late to properly address this climate change crisis that we are facing, this existential threat that it feels like it's not enough is being done to actually reverse the damage? She asked me that question, is it too late, right? So, is it too late? Well, hold it, that's not the right book. Is it too late? Yes, it's too late, right? And so I got to actually say the one thing I wanted to say. We are headed towards the collapse of global industrial civilization. We're headed towards the sixth great extinction. And I was so overjoyed by that actually went out, and I was able to say that, because that's the single message that needs to get out. That's the single thing. Everybody will have to make their decisions about their lives and what they want to do with their lives only after coming to realize the truth of that sentence, right? We are heading towards the collapse of global industrial civilization. We're heading towards we're in the sixth great extinction is more proper, but it is accelerating as well. So yeah, I was definitely would go on any mass media again. If you're out there, MSNBC, any of you guys, just give me a call. Joe Rogan, right? Joe Rogan, Joe Rogan, all right? Joe Rogan, give me a call. I want to go on your show. Okay, let's see what other questions I have. Hi, Tennessee, Jed. Let's see. The Bronze and Iron Age didn't end. It just added to it. Let's see what else. So Nadia asks, isn't there some potential for oceans to be absorbing some of the missing heat via warming at depth? Well, absolutely. And this people don't understand. We have dumped over 20 billion Hiroshima nuclear bombs worth of heat into the oceans in the last 50 years, right? So 20 billion Hiroshima bombs worth of heat. So where is all that heat gone? Well, the surfaces are currently very hot. And if you actually start measuring, sort of going down, it turns out we've heated up pretty much the entire top 2,000 meters, right? Roughly the top 1 mile of the ocean we've heated up. But there's a lot more water than that out there. And so, yeah, if we can get these sort of vertical circulation, there certainly would be a lot of mixing of the warm water with colder water at depth. That's still potentially out there. But, we rely on these main, global overturning circulations to do that mixing for us. And if those sort of slow down, then we'll just have even faster heating of surface waters. And, the AMOC collapse, if this current slows down, then all of that heat that usually gets transported into the northern hemisphere will stay in the southern hemisphere. So what we'll actually see, is the northern hemisphere will start freezing and the southern hemisphere will get hotter and hotter and hotter. And that's sort of, the future that's happening there. All right, let's see. I don't understand some of what people are saying, but I'm glad you're saying it. If I don't answer it, then don't take it personally. Cormac Dublin says, have you any hope for technological developments that could keep up with planetary decline so we could actually have a better equitable quality of life for the whole global community? If you include in the global community trees and, wildlife, plants, oceans, ocean life, then the answer is no. Wind does huge damage to ecosystems. Solar does huge damage to ecosystems. And people will argue, but, fossil does even more. Right, of course it does, but all technologies are doing more damage, right? There is not a technology that's doing less damage. And so until we find a technology that actually creates energy while simultaneously fixing places we've damaged, we will just continue to create planetary decline. So, that's the big issue. So, people say, well, we should have nuclear. And all I have to say about that is somebody who actually demonstrated against nuclear power in the 70s and 80s myself, that you did not live through 3 Mile Island. You did not live through Chernobyl, the meltdown of Chernobyl. Or maybe you did, but, it's not strong in your memory. Maybe you know about Fukushima. And then you say, oh, but, they could be made safer. Yeah, of course they could be made safer. But then we have, radioactive waste that is 100,000 years worth. So many reasons I dislike, I don't agree with creating more energy, and then it's Javon's paradox again. So we create more energy with nuclear. So what? We will use it and still grow. We are a cancer. We genuinely are. What is my favorite climate song? what is the end of civilization? I can't remember it right now. I do have one. All right, let's see what else we have. All right, Jason says, few people can see outside the cave far enough to realize civilization itself is the root of our predicament. Yeah, so referring to Plato's cave, if you don't know the allegory of the cave. So um, the cave paradox is actually also the plot of some famous movies like The Matrix and Star Wars. So it is this idea that you live in a world where you don't fully understand all that's going on, and suddenly the larger picture is revealed to you, and you have to make a decision whether you want to live awake in that larger, more complicated, more dangerous, in many ways more terrible world, or you want to go keep living sort of in this asleep, being asleep. And so, the Matrix is asked that question directly with the red pill or the blue pill. Let's see, what else do we have? Akron says, I'm not used to gaming meat. I imagine that's about eating humans. So Martin confirms that about 93% of biomass is us and our livestock. I'm glad I got that number roughly right. And so I'm sorry to be so far behind. Again, let me skip to the very end and see what I have. Yeah, the end of the world as we know it. That's the song. Thank you. Going south, that's it. You heard me humming and you got it. Yes, the end of the world as we know it. Thank you for that. Let's see, what else do we have? All right, Nadia, very smart person I've seen in other ways, other social media avenues. I forget how to phrase what's called when oceanic convection as heat transport stops or is slowed down. I think it's stratification. I think stratification and Canfield oceans are related. So that's something to look up if you're interested in the question about deep ocean heating. Let's see what else. All right, so let me talk about two other things that are sort of pertinent to what's going on now. One of them has to do with, is CO2 slowing down? And people will look at the the curve, and let me show you this curve right here. I have to kind of go to this. Hang on. So, this curve of course. So people will look at this and think, how could you say that methane or CO2 is slowing down? Where I have to go onto methane, onto CO2. Here it is. When we have this steady increase. So, this is a question that I've actually paid attention to quite closely, is what is the rate of increase of CO2? And this idea that we've somehow plateaued in our CO2 emissions is a key question, because we can only get to net zero after we sort of stop putting out more. And I think one of the really heartbreaking facts about 2023 was that was a record year for CO2 emissions. And if you are somebody who is saying, no, we are headed down now, right? We're going down again. Then, this is, it's the opposite of what you want to see. And so I have a graphic somewhere that I want to show you. Maybe I'll have to do it next time. But essentially what I do is I plot CO2 growth over 3 years. So I'm not plotting absolute CO2. So, this is a graph of absolute CO2 in the atmosphere. But what happens if you look at how much growth in CO2 there was? Well, we just recently learned that from 2022 to and 2024, right, that 2-year period from peak to peak, the 2-year peak to peak period in CO2, and let me see if I can just pull this thing up, and I might have to move myself right over here. There I go. Oops, I have to move that too. Okay, never mind. If you look at the peak CO2 growth from year to year, then those 2 years are the fastest. But what happens if you look at peak to peak over 5 years? Then what it turns out is for the last 5 years, we sort of had flat CO2 growth. And so, these people who say that CO2 growth has flattened aren't talking about the absolute amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Of course, that's still going up. What they're trying to say is it's not, the rate at which it's going up is no longer increasing. Well, that was kind of busted by this report that was just released today, right, that I tweeted about, that in fact, yes, 2023 was the biggest rate ever. And it also takes into account, look, we had the year 2020, right, which was the COVID year, where there was this 7 or 8% decline in CO2 for that 1 year. That was massive decline in that 1 year. And then we had 3 years of La Nina. And what happens during La Nina, you have a colder ocean. Well, a colder water tends to hold more gases. That's why we keep our sodas in the refrigerator, right? When you heat up a liquid, the gases from it tend to get expelled. So when we went from 3 years of La Nina to El Nino, right, all of this CO2 that has sort of been building up got expelled. And so we had this huge jump in 2023. So we can sort of see these transient impacts. So when you look at this 5 year, the important thing to know about that is we had 2020, we had COVID decline, 21, 22, 23, we had, La Nina years, and now we're coming out of 23 into 24 where El Nino, it doesn't make up for that other decline. And so sure, over this 5 year period, it looks like we didn't have any CO2 growth. So, what we're really looking at are the next couple of years to see what happens with CO2. To really measure whether we're making any progress at all towards net zero. And in my opinion, the answer is no, we're not, right? We are still having CO2 growth as a planet. And, all these people, these climate scientists who keep, with much of the same fever that Roger Hallam has towards revolution, they have the same fever towards sort of going to a zero CO2 net zero world, as if we will get there, as if that will happen. It's kind of an ain't gonna happen, and there has to be some sort of disconnect. And you understand that disconnect because if we don't get to net zero, then that does mean collapse, right? And so the alternative is so bad that you almost want to say, well, that won't happen. We will get there, right? And so I kind of understand Michael Mann, his sort of passion for, and Housefather, their passion for that issue above all else. Boy, was that a rambling monologue. I really don't always say much. Hello, Elliot. Greetings from Czech Republic. Do you follow the question of peak oil? Recently, I've watched a few podcasts on it. The person who really talked a lot about peak oil was Michael Rupert. And if you ever want to really see some amazing videos, watch what he posted in the late 2008, 2009 about peak oil and collapse. And that's spelled Ruppert, Michael Rupert. I don't really follow it, though. So I have about 10 more minutes here. I'm good till 2 o'clock my time. I don't always get it right because it's live, and so hopefully you're totally okay with that. Nadia says that ChatGPT says that the ability of a liquid to absorb gases is called absorbency. So I guess it's the ocean losing its absorbency alongside the gas losing its solubility. So the other question I was going to talk about, and I missed out, is methane. So methane actually has shown a fairly substantial Well, it keeps going up again, right? But it's fairly substantial decline in the rate at which it is going up. And this actually does need to be highlighted because this is this issue of there being a methane bomb that is somehow going to go off any minute now. You have to look at this graph. This is the annual global increase in methane, right? So yes, we peaked here in 2021. The growth rate of methane peaked in 2021, and then it sort of went down the last 2 years. The growth rate, not the actual amount of methane, but the rate at which methane was growing in the atmosphere declined in these 2 years. And so, why did it decline? What was the thing that made it decline? And I wrote quite extensively about this peak back in the day. And there are good explanations for this peak happening that had nothing to do with methane emissions themselves. It's not like we've suddenly stopped fracking. It's not like, we have suddenly plugged all the leaks in all the wells. It's not like, people have suddenly weaned themselves from natural gas. There is something else going on here when you see a decline that is this fast in methane. And so what I would argue is that it has everything to do with the atmospheric lifetime of methane. So in particular, most methane gets oxidized by radicals, OH radicals, around the equator, right? So what happens, roughly speaking, is that photon, a high energy photon comes in and it hits a water molecule and it splits off the OH, and it's this energized thing that's looking for something to react with. And the first thing it reacts with is, if it's methane, then that methane gets oxidized and it's gone. Poof, it's gone. Now, it turns out that carbon monoxide is about 100 times as reactive with a hydroxyl as methane. So if there's a lot of carbon monoxide around, then you're going to have these hydroxyls preferentially, reacting with the carbon monoxide. So where do we get huge sources of carbon monoxide around the equator? And you see, the equator is where most methane gets oxidized. It's where we get the most direct sun, right? And so we get the most hydroxyls. Where does carbon monoxide comes from? Well, it turns out that one of the largest anthropogenic sources are fires, the fires that we create. And how do we create these fires? By burning forests, clear-cutting forests, so that we can, plant stuff or use them for grazing or use them to build new cities or roads. So, especially in Brazil, right? We have these massive fires going on, and there's still some of those. But this is one of about 5 or 6 different chemistry mechanisms by which hydroxyls were preferentially being used for something other than to oxidize methane. So I am speculating, just something as simple as a change in government in Brazil is having a lot to do with this decrease. It has nothing to do with us suddenly being good humans. So I have a paper on that I wrote as well. And if you're interested in the question of methane, so let me see if I can find that for you and just show that to you real quickly here. So yeah, this is an article on the on methane. Here's that article. Oh, I just found it. Is the methane collapse happening right now? Sometimes I don't know what screen I'm on. So here it is. Is the methane catastrophe happening right now? And I talk about, here it is. You can see I wrote this article right when methane peaked. And hopefully that'll give you some insights into methane that are other than, oh, humans are doing so good. Because, the climate scientists want you to think that this is due to great social changes in how we're feeding cows or how we're, controlling our pipeline leaks or whatever the thing is. So, my thesis is that the bulk of what's happened to methane over the last couple of years has to do with varying ways hydroxyls are interacting directly with methane. Let's see. Yeah, somebody asked, do I put anything up on archive? No, everything I post is on my blog, and again, that's climatecasino.net. So you might enjoy reading that. Let's see, what other questions do I have here in the last 5 minutes or so? Yeah, Richard Monger says there's a Guardian article today that 2023 had the highest fossil fuel consumption. You know, just amazing, amazing that we continue to be under this delusion that we're going to be in any sort of net zero trajectory. Kanal says, thank you for what you do, Mr. Jacobson. Well, thank you for that. Thank you. And honestly, I don't know what else to do. You know, everybody has to do what they do. For me, I am very vocal about being a doomer, right? I am a doomer. I am somebody who sees no other alternative than the collapse of global industrial civilization in the near term. I don't like to go about predicting dates. I think we could certainly do a lot more damage to the planet on our way out by destroying ever more ecosystems to generate alternative energy and food sources that prolong our civilization for a few more years. You know, my hope would be that we don't do that, that things collapse sooner rather than later to preserve as much of the planet as we can for whatever comes after humans, or after human civilization, after modern human civilization at the very least. But yeah, being a doomer is not easy. There is a lot of hate that gets thrown at doomers, especially online, especially by mainstream climate scientists, as if we are doing the unwitting work of the fossil fuel industry by slowing down technologies that would destroy even more of the environment. Somebody recently said that I fit well into, what did they call, the bright green resistance. And I had to look up the bright green resistance, but apparently this is a group of people who will essentially sabotage anything and everything that destroys any environmental habitat that is otherwise intact. And it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a new factory or a solar farm or wind farm or whatever it is. Just everything is put on the line to preserve natural spaces. I'm not an activist like that, but I could certainly sympathize with that point of view. Well, I think I probably got a lot of stuff wrong here today. I apologize for not getting to every question. Thank you for the great chat and the great questions in chat. You can find me on Twitter at Elliot Jacobson. That's where I do most of my social networking stuff. I also have a YouTube channel at Climate Casino, where this video will be saved. You can also find my, what do you call it? My blog, climatecasino.net. And, I put my email address on my blog. If there's something that you feel you want to talk to me about that deserves an email, feel free to send me an email and we can see what happens. Okay, everybody, today is solstice. We're actually 9 minutes, according to my clock, past solstice. Solstice was at 1:50 p.m. Today, my time, 4:50 on the East Coast. So happy solstice, everybody. As they say, may the long-time sun shine upon you. All right, everyone. I can't say all right, everyone, yet. I have to boot up my closer. All right, everyone, this is Elliot Jacobson. See you later.